Good evening and welcome to the May 4th, 2016 meeting of the Murfreesboro Planning Commission. We have a quorum present, so I'll call the meeting to order. The first item on the agenda tonight is to approve the minutes of March 16th. Are there any additions or corrections to those minutes? If none, I'll declare them approved as submitted. Tonight we have 4 public hearings scheduled. The first of which is a zoning application for approximately 22.5 acres located along Memorial Boulevard and Haynes Haven Lane to amend the PCD. National Health Care Corporation is the applicant. Ms. Green, good evening.
Yes, sir. Good evening to you and the rest of the Planning Commission members. Our first public hearing this evening is for you to consider to amend an existing PUD, Planned Unit District zone for property located along Memorial Drive, and it's shown on the illustration before you. The property is mostly zoned PUD, Planned Unit District, with a very small portion of it running along Haynes Haven Lane, zoned RS15. The properties to the west and to the south are zoned RS15 in that single-family residential district. The property across the street is zoned CH, and that's Commercial Highway District, and RS15, and that would be the Walmart and the city's airport. Properties to the north are also zoned CH, Highway Commercial District, and is the currently under development grocery store, Sprouts, and some additional uses that you typically see with a grocery store. This property was zoned PUD in 2001 to allow the Adams Place development, which I believe most of us are familiar with. The Adams Place is a 93-unit independent living apartments with 83 assisted living units and 90 skilled living beds. They wish to make some modifications to the site and add additional 23 units strictly for the memory care unit. And because it's a planned development, they'll need to amend the PUD to allow that proposed use. The applicants will come up in just a moment to make a presentation to you regarding their zoning change amendment. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them either before or after the public hearing, but I'd like to go ahead and invite the team to the lectern at this moment.
Mr. Murphy.
Good evening, Chairman Lamb, members of the Planning Commission staff. I'm Rick Murphy of the law firm of Murphy Goodman. I represent NHC, who owns the Adams Place facility on Memorial. The proposal is to put in a memory care unit for people with dementia. It'll be located internally on their campus. It's a one-story building. The architecture will be the same as the architecture of the rest of the Adams Place campus. Just a little background on our outreach to the neighbors. We sent out mailings to the neighbors in Haynes Haven and fairly far and wide. And immediately, usually after I send these letters out, I start getting phone calls. And I fielded probably 3 or 4 phone calls, explained to folks what the project was, that it was internal to Adams Place's campus, and they all seemed to be very supportive and saw the need for this in the community, and also saw that it would not be impactful to them. My suspicion is because Haynes Haven is so well organized as a neighborhood, that either an email distribution went out or phone calls or people talking over the fence. But when we had our neighborhood meeting, it was very sparsely attended, which normally I'm concerned with, but in this case was a good thing. We had more professionals and executives there than there were neighbors, and the neighbors who did come, I guess, had not gotten an email or not talked to somebody over the fence, and were quite pleased with the addition to the campus. In a minute, Clyde Roundtree with Huddleston Steel Engineering will walk you through the specifics of the plan. Mr. Tom Campbell, an executive with NHC, will also speak as to the need, the history, and some specifics about the programming for this facility. Mr. Adam Coggins and Barry Buckley are here. They're executives at NHC as well. And also are part of the principal managers of Adams Place campus. I'd just like to say in closing, it's been a pleasure working with the good people at NHC. I think my dad would say that this just goes to show that doing things the right way pays dividends in the long run. Taking shortcuts may seem like it's the right thing to do in the near term, but the fact that we had nothing but positive support on anything I ever do is, I can't say that that's ever happened. So I'd just like to say I appreciate it, and I would like y'all to vote in favor of it. And without further ado, Mr. Roundtree.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy.
Thank you, Brick. Chairman Lamb, Planning Commissioners, staff. My name is Clyde Roundtree with Huddleston Steel Engineering. And as Margaret Ann and Brick mentioned, it's about a 14,000 square foot structure that'll be in addition to the existing facility. And one of the nice things about this facility, it's going to attach to the existing structure, so it's going to be basically behind the existing building. And in order to accomplish the goal of this construction, we're going to displace one covered parking carport area, and that'll be relocated further back on the site. So as far as the visual impact, nothing from Memorial will change. As far as Haynes Haven's perspective from the rear, nothing should change in terms of their perspective as well. As Brick mentioned, Johnson Bailey will be the architect, so it will be consistent in character with what's already been accomplished with Johnson Bailey. They are the architects of record for the facility. And it's really a 5% change in terms of the overall coverage of building on site. The parking will be displaced and redistributed along the site, which is shown in the pattern book in your possession. And as far as the biggest concern that Haynes Haven would have and had was any sort of deviation in the buffer. Would anything change? And really, we should have no impact on the rear buffer, which is the primary concern that they had. Actually, at our neighborhood meeting, they had multiple concerns related to drainage, but it wasn't related to our particular project. One question that came up, and I think it might have been one of the staff or commissioners, is access. Access for the construction of the site will be from Memorial Boulevard on the northern portion of the property. And like Brick said, we've really not run into any resistance in relationship to this project. Adams Place has a great reputation for quality of service, and this is a great addition to their caregiving, their continuum of care that they'll offer at the facility. So we're excited about being associated with it, being a part of it, and as Brick said, we trust that this will be approved by you. And Mr. Campbell would like to come up and just finalize our presentation related to the purpose of Adams Place in our community. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Tom Campbell. I'm Director of Development with National Healthcare Corporation. Thank you, Commissioner and Commissioners, for hearing our application. As was mentioned, our project is a relatively small building. It's our addition, about 14,000 gross square building feet, added to a campus of over 250,000 square feet. It's only going to increase the size of our campus by a little less than 5%. And while that's a small addition in terms of scope, it's very important to the community. It's very important to Murfreesboro. It's very important to NHC. And the reason it is because our market, the senior market, is a rapidly growing market. Seniors who are defined as 65 years old or older is a market that's almost doubling in a 20-year period. In 2010, there were roughly 40 million individuals who met that characteristic. That's going to grow to 72 million by 2030. So in light of this growing market, NHC has always strived to provide Murfreesboro with quality care, quality senior living alternatives there. And in doing so, we've expanded Adams Place twice, once by adding a rehab unit and another time by adding home health care. And so, but in doing so, and keeping up with our research, we've identified that there's currently a gap in our offering that we need to provide for our community and for the city of Murfreesboro, and that is to provide a secure memory care facility. That's what this 23-unit facility is designed to do and to complement our continuum of care offering at Adams Place. I've mentioned how fast our market's growing, but to emphasize how important it is, just consider this fact from the Alzheimer's Association, that 1 out of every 3 seniors who dies, they're dying with Alzheimer's or a form of dementia. So it's important to the community, it's important to NHC, and we hope that you're recommended to the City Council for, moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. Any questions of the applicant before we open the public hearing?
One question, Mr. Lamb. Is this a one-story building, gentlemen?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, in case you have not attended any of our public hearings previously, I'll briefly go over our rules that we conduct all the public hearings by. We'll open the public hearing, ask anybody that would like to speak to come forward to the microphone. When you come forward to the microphone, please clearly state your name and give your address for the record. Keep your comments or questions to no more than 3 minutes. If you have questions, the staff will make a note of your questions, and we'll try to get those answered at the end of the public hearing. I'll make all your questions to the Planning Commission and not other members of the audience, if you would. That being said, I'll open the public hearing for this proposal at this time. Ask anybody to come forward that'd like to speak. Anybody at all? Don't be shy. In that case, I'll close the public hearing. Questions from members of the Planning Commission?
Mr. Chairman, I move for approval.
Second motion.
Motion's made and seconded. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed. Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Campbell. Wonderful facility. I think it's gone over well in Murfreesboro, and I think what you're doing here is going to be well received by seniors like Mr. Young.
Can I get a bed now?
The next public hearing will be pertaining to a zoning application for approximately 5.6 acres located along West Northfield Boulevard and Silver Springs Road to amend the PCD. Tarver Properties Incorporated is the applicant. Ms. Green.
Thank you. Sir, this next item is for you to consider an amendment to an existing PCD, that's Planned Commercial District, for property located south of West Northfield Boulevard. The property is also located west of Sulphur Springs Road, and you can see it on the map before you as a property shaded orange. The property is zoned PCD and was zoned such in 2005 for a development called Spring Village. The property to the west and to the south is zoned RS15 in that single-family residential district with a minimum lot size of 15,000 square feet, and it is developed city single-family subdivision. Across Sulphur Springs Road is Sinking Creek, which you can see on the map as well, and also property zoned RM16, and that RM16 stands for multifamily residential district, and it is currently a developed multifamily apartment community with 16 dwelling units per acre, and it's known as Haynes Manor Apartment Community. To the north is property zoned RS10 in that single-family residential district just across West Northfield Boulevard with a smaller lot size than the RS15 district. It has a lot size of 10,000 square feet. The property to the north directly across from this property is zoned for single-family purposes, although I know that there have been signs on it for many years advertising it as potential commercial property. But today the zoning is RS10. And then you can see on the opposite corner is property zone PUD, that's Planned Unit District, and it's the location of Saddlebrook Apartment Community, and of course it's a multifamily development. As I mentioned, the property which we're discussing tonight was zoned PCD in 2005 for Spring Village to allow a limited amount of commercial and institutional uses, and I've included some exhibits of the Spring Village PCD in your agenda packet. What's being proposed now is a PCD which they are calling, let's see, they've changed the name, Northfield Village. So it was Spring Village, now it's Northfield Village, and I think the name Spring Village came from the fact that there was spring on the property. In addition to the spring, there's a institutional group assembly, informally known as a church. That church hasn't been occupied in quite some time. The uses that in the previous PCD were limited to no establishments where on-premise consumption of intoxicating beverages is the primary activity, so no bars, but a restaurant that serves alcohol would be permitted. No auto sales and or services, and no amplified outdoor music. Those same conditions that applied to the previous PCD, Spring Village, they're also adding those conditions in the proposed PCD, Northfield Village. The applicant has a contract to purchase the property and as such has requested that the PCD amended to fit their program. They've basically divided the property into two lots, Lot 1 and Lot 2. Lot 1 is a proposed self-storage facility, and Lot 2 has a less certain development future, but they have provided a list of uses in the program book, and I've also listed them in the staff comments that they would propose to be allowed on the Lot 2. The plan development also commits to certain architectural standards that will apply to both Lots 1 and Lots 2. In just a moment, I'll invite the team to the lectern, and they can go through the details of the plan, including the proposed architecture. The plan development process asks that the PCD be compared to an existing city zoning district, and they are comparing it to the CF, which is Commercial Fringe District, which would be an appropriate use. And they also are asked to identify any exceptions to the zoning ordinance in the plan development process. And the exceptions that they've asked are for the front and rear setback. The CF district requires 42 feet setback from both West Northfield Boulevard and Sulphur Springs Road, and they are requesting that the front setback be reduced to 15 feet, and then the rear setback is required to be 20 feet, and they're asking for that to be 15 feet. The applicants did hold a neighborhood meeting on March the 21st for this application before they actually ever made an application, and did get some very valuable feedback from that neighborhood meeting. At this time, I'll invite the design team to the lectern to go through a presentation of the proposed PCD amendment called Northfield Village. If you have questions, I'd be glad to answer them. Otherwise, you should conduct a public hearing and then make your recommendation to City Council.
Mr. Murphy?
It's on there.
As usual, I'm squeaking in just in time. So, once again, good evening, Chairman Lamb, members of the Planning Commission and staff. I'm Brick Murphy of the law firm of Murphy and Goodman, and our offices are at 805 South Church Street, Suite 21. I can move this thing. All right.
I've been
There we go.
listed enough on this.
The applicant is Mr. Mark Tarver, and the application is to rezone 5.6 acres on the corner of Sulphur Springs and Northfield. The applicant, again, is Mark Tarver, and it's 5.6 acres. It's a planned commercial development, which currently allows for some retail uses I'll discuss in just a minute. The history of the property is it was once two tracts, one owned by Carol Huffman, the other owned by the Free Will Baptist Church. The remnants of that church are still on the site, and it's currently owned by John T. Holloway. The existing zoning, which is a PCD, was passed in 2005, and it was a rezoning to that commercial district from residential. Just for the audience, a planned commercial district is basically a development plan, and we have a booklet, usually a pattern booklet, that spells out all the specifics, landscaping, lighting, all of these things, uses, and that booklet becomes the zoning. So anytime we want to change the booklet in any way, like tonight we want to add a use, mini warehouses, it has to come back through the process again, because the entitlements are only for those things shown in the booklet and approved, unlike a bulk zoning, like commercial highway. Here's the site, if you will. It's the corner of Northfield again and Sulphur Springs, down near Northfield Elementary. Here's the existing kind of pattern booklet shot of what was proposed, which you can see is to the north, the left-hand side. You've got a pretty large office building. You've got a set of 3 retail buildings, and then what we're going to call the out parcel to the south, which is the corner of Sulphur Springs and Northfield. Was anticipated to be probably a bank or something like that. So you can see it's a pretty intense use by right now. Here are just some slides from the current existing zoning showing a nice retail center. Currently, the PCD allows for a mixture of commercial uses such as retail, restaurants, offices, a bank, liquor stores, those sorts of things. To be a little bit more precise, there's always a table in these things that kind of gives us an idea of what percent particular use could be. About 4,125 square feet for the anticipated bank, kind of out on the out parcel. About 12,000 plus feet of office space. 21,335 square feet of retail, basically, a upscale kind of strip center with traditional uses allowed, such as shops, liquor stores, convenience markets, carry-out restaurants, boutique settings, kind of places. So the total that could go on that acreage is 37,518 square feet, 37,518 square feet of commercial use, which is pretty dense. Mark would like to amend the existing zoning to have 3.79 acres zoned for his mini warehouse facility. That's basically taking out the north or more Northfield side of the property and leaving that little bank area. The mini warehouse is going to be heavily landscaped. The facility, the architecture, they hired Jim Lowen, the same gentleman who did the pattern book for the existing zoning. And the goal there was to mimic the look of the existing, pattern book, which was high, it was a high scale retail kind of feel, and to try to pull those design elements into the storage facility, so it looked more like retail from the street than it would look like a 50 years ago storage unit with aluminum siding, which is this is a brave new world compared to that. The proposal for the balance of the tract, that's the 1.8 acres, basically it's not changed. We've taken liquor stores off of the possible uses out of a request from the neighbors, but it'll probably be a bank or a restaurant or something along those lines. Basically, it's reserved for future development, and that's that corner piece there where Sulphur Springs and Northfield intersect. Here's a diagram of the proposal. As you can see, there are about 8 buildings, an office, and you can see in the front it's heavily landscaped. Matt Taylor in a minute will talk more about the specifics, but the buildings are pulled up to the edges to provide additional buffering. Just a couple, two of the major concerns that we heard at the neighborhood meeting, which was well attended, was and also heard through emails and phone calls. I talked to quite a few neighbors, and always do, and their concerns were basically 2 things. One, drainage, because there had been a spring on the property, and there was some concern about how it was managed, and we've got a good engineering firm who can deal with these things fairly easily. So Matt's firm, SEC, can address the stormwater issues during development, no problem. The other major issue was traffic. A number of neighbors indicated that at times of the day that this Northfield Sulphur Springs intersection is dangerous. They indicated that there's a lot of volume during peak times when school gets out, 5 o'clock, that sort of thing, and there's some backing up at that light. I would say that's pretty common in a lot of places in Murfreesboro, and I like that there's traffic, but that's just an aside. The existing PCD would be a significant traffic generator. If you've got 37,000 plus square feet of commercial buildings and restaurants and things, you're going to have a lot of car trips. You're going to have people coming and going from work, going to their favorite bakery, their favorite tobacco outlet, or wherever it might be. The existing use by right in the PCD has 186 parking spaces, so that just tells you how many people they think may be on site at any time. And if developed in the way that it is currently zoned, which Mr. Holloway would have a right to do, you're going to have some significant traffic generation at this intersection. Some benefits of the proposal before you. One of the major benefits of many warehouse facilities is they virtually have no traffic. They generate very, very little traffic. Matt Taylor calculated last night as we were working on this presentation at the wee hours in the morning the estimated traffic generation, and you'll see in a minute that the mini warehouses versus the retail and offices drastically change the potential for additional traffic, at least traffic driven from this site. Other benefits, the applicants are going to be held to the same road improvements that Mr. Holloway would have had to do, even though their proposal will have less of an impact on traffic due to the nature of many warehouses. They're still having to put in a significant turn lane on Sulphur Springs that goes all the way down the side of the property, and then some. That'll help people trying to turn left. It will prevent people running the light, hopefully backing up. And then there'll be some decel left and right turn lanes into the property, which will prevent having trailers or moving vans stuck out on the road and through traffic stopped. And it also will provide kind of a safety valve. Kind of think about it like a runaway truck ramp. If somebody's going too fast and is coming down the hill, if the lane is not full, there's somewhere for them to go besides into the grass. And these are just some of the commitments. It's a less intensive use, obviously. 37 plus square feet of commercial and retail generates a lot of noise, but daily delivery of food, service trucks, goods, supplies to multiple businesses and stores, often after hours. Normally these deliveries come at night when the store isn't open and the night clerk brings things in, and it can be noisy. The new plan basically eliminates the need for every building to have a dumpster. I mean, if it was developed as retail and office, they'd all have dumpsters. Particularly the restaurants would definitely need to have them. Dumpsters don't look nice; they don't smell nice. I'm sure you've all been awoken at some point in a city with the big, that safety annoying beeping sound as the dump truck backs up to pick up the dumpster, and that's one of the things that would be much less prevalent here. Because they're not ongoing businesses. You go to store your Christmas ornaments. Many storage facilities, once again, are infrequently visited. I've got 3, 2 for my office, 1 personally, and I probably go to, or my staff goes to one for the office, about once a month to get old files. My personal one I've been in twice. It has Christmas ornaments in it, basically. There'll be no plugs allowed, so you won't have garage bands, or if somebody gets kicked out of the house by an angry spouse, they won't be camping in there for the night. They're not destinations like offices or restaurants. Basically, you go, you drop your stuff off, and you leave, and you go pick up whatever it is and leave. You're not hanging out, so to speak. Just in closing, I'd like to point out, once again, traffic, noise, odors. A mini warehouse facility like this, a Class A, basically has very little of those things. And in fact, it's probably one of the least impactful commercial uses that I can think of. Maybe a cell phone tower, but you've got to deal with the big tower with a blinking light on it if you have a cell phone tower. But this is one of your least intensive commercial uses frankly possible. I struggle to think of something much less. Once again, the proposal before you is a result of many, many months of work with staff, Mr. Tarver, myself, Matt Taylor, their engineer, and Jim Lowen, their architect. I had several meetings with the city. Ms. Green was kind enough to be very forthcoming in her desires to see a Class A project and help shape the design, which was very appreciated. Their goal from the beginning when they contacted me was to have the highest quality facility they could with the least impact on neighbors. And when people call me and say that, then they've got a lawyer. And that's the sort of thing that I like to do and I like to hear. We're going to bring something nice. We want to do it the best we can, and we want to be sensitive to neighbors. And so we worked aggressively towards those goals. Mr. Matt Taylor with SEC is going to walk us through the specifics of the project. Our full team, Mr. Lowen, Mr. Tarver, myself, will be here to answer any questions you may have. I appreciate it, and I hope you will vote in favor of the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. Mr. Taylor.
Thank you, Brick. Chairman Lamb, members of the Planning Commission, I'm Matt Taylor of SEC. And I will be brief, but try to hit the important parts of the site design itself, if we can. Here it is, about 9 buildings spread across 63,000 square feet on the mini storage, and then the 1.8 acre out parcel to the right of your screen. We've planned for detention, stormwater features down along Sulphur Springs Road, which is the natural low point of the property itself. So we'll maintain that and maintain our flows off this site and meet the city's stormwater quality requirements all down there along the road. We do have 3 access points, which is identical to the previously approved plan. 2 of those are on Sulphur Springs Road, or 2 of those are on Northfield, 1 of those on Sulphur Springs Road. We anticipate that all 3 will be constructed with phase 1 of the project, which would be the mini storage warehouses. The 2 access points directly into the mini storage would be gated with a keypad so that only renters or tenants could access that portion of the site. You'll notice that the site itself is almost entirely enclosed by buildings. That was done on purpose to buffer against our neighbors so that the back of the buildings could act as walls, in addition to the thick landscaping that we proposed all the way around the building. All of our buildings are 1-story in height and about 10 feet on the back of those buildings, which would adjoin the neighbors. As Brick mentioned, we're doing several roadway improvements. Along Northfield Boulevard, we're planning a left turn lane coming from the Memorial side, and then a right turn lane coming from the Broad Street side into our entrance into the mini storage. Along Sulphur Springs Road, we're doing extensive reconstruction here to widen that road to include 3 lanes all the way through our entrance onto Sulphur Springs, as well as south from there to allow for storage of vehicles to turn left into our development, and then taper back down before it gets back to the next roadway intersection. Along this segment of Sulphur Springs, we'll also be adding curb and gutter rather than the ditch section that's currently present along Sulphur Springs Road. As Mr. Murphy said, this development is much less intense traffic-wise. The existing plan that's currently approved generates almost up to 100 cars entering during the peak hour. This plan cuts that by about 25%, or down 25% to about 25 cars entering on the peak hour. And almost all of that is attributed back to the 1.8 acre out parcel, which is retail in nature. Building design, all these will be single-story buildings. We have vertical features and bandings to help break up those and make that a very interesting architectural line along the street there to avoid any long walls. We have varying roof lines. Good quality materials, EFIS detailing, cast stone, pilaster caps, brick, stone. You can see here, this would be the view basically from the existing median opening into our project on the top. And then on the bottom would be the perimeter wall that would be facing our neighbors. Landscape design, we've planned type C buffers all along the western and southern boundary. The other boundary, the eastern boundary, would adjoin the out parcel and would receive a normal planting yard requirement. The southern boundary of the out parcel that adjoins the residence will also receive a solid fence as well as the type C buffer, and both of those will be installed with the entry drive over to Sulphur Springs Road. And then, of course, very formal landscaping along all the public roadways. An example of the type fencing we plan to propose along the entry drive onto Sulphur Springs. And then our buffers will be heavily reliant upon evergreen materials. Lot 2, the out parcel. We have outlined those allowable uses. As Mr. Murphy said, those are identical to the previously approved plan with the exception that we've removed liquor stores from that list at the request of the neighbors. And I believe all those uses were previously requested and approved because of the low impact to the surrounding areas, as well as offering services to those areas that are not currently in the immediate vicinity, such as card shops, barber shops, weight loss, maybe even a plants or flower store, and a full list of that is available inside of your booklet. And myself, as well as the rest of the design team, will be happy to answer any questions now or after the public hearing.
Matt, it may be in the booklet somewhere, but how many storage units are included in here?
We don't have a definite number of storage units. The total square footage is about 63,000. But the applicant the only thing that's really set in those is the depth. We've got a variety of depths of buildings as we go around the site, but he could intermix those and move and make those go from a 10-foot wide unit to a 5-foot, depending on what the market allows, basically, and what it fleshes out.
Okay. Any other questions?
I got one question, Mr. Chairman. Matt, the drainage off of this, is it going to go under Sulphur Springs Road and into Sinking Creek?
Yes, sir. After we collect it inside of a stormwater system, treat it, hold it for 24 to 48 hours, and let the sediment and other pollutants settle out, we'll discharge it into Sinking Creek like it does today, except for...
It's not treated today.
Yes, sir.
Matt, will the road that will access the mini warehouses to Sulphur Springs, will that be developed from the get-go, or is that going to be developed when the other lots develop?
That will be developed from the get-go. We have, with the roadway improvements that we are planning on Sulphur Springs, as well as the turn lanes, all of that will be developed with the mini storage warehousing. We want to allow people with good access to get back to the signal to be able to turn left in the peak times.
Good deal.
Any other questions? Thank you, sir. In that case, I'll open the public hearing. Ask anybody to come forward to the microphone that would like to speak.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. First of all, I want to compliment the...
I'm sorry, sir. Would you state your name and address?
Randy Johnson, live at 615 Elliott Drive. I want to compliment the developers on a very well done plan, very well laid out, very attractive. I would ask that if the commission agrees to amend this plan, that there are two things that I and a number of neighbors that I've spoken with would like to see actually documented and added to the plan. Number one, we'd like to see proposed allowed and prohibited activities within the storage buildings. No living in the storage building. Brick and them have mentioned several of these things, but I think we'd like to see it actually written into the agreement that these things would not be allowed, working on cars, living in the units, housing animals in the units, storage of hazardous materials, and so forth. The other thing we would like to see is the landscaping and cleanup of lot number 2 as part of the initial development. I believe Matt just mentioned that, or Mark just mentioned that that roadway would be developed off of Sulphur Springs Road from the get-go. We'd also like to see that, though, the landscape buffer and the fence put there from the beginning. In other words, go ahead and finish out all the landscaping for all the property and not just for around the mini warehouse. And we'd like to see that corner lot go ahead and be landscaped, be nice green space until such time as it's developed. Right now it's an eyesore. There's a mound of dirt there from prior construction. The grass doesn't get cut on it. Somebody's being allowed to park dump trucks on that property. So we'd like to see lot number 2, until it is developed, treated as green space and kept neat, clean, and attractive to the neighborhood.
Okay.
Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Anybody else?
I'm David C. Leverett. I reside at 2007 Sanders Court. I'm also here this evening to represent 4 of my neighbors, Mr. and Mrs. Barry Smotherman, Betty McKenzie, Juanita Davis, my daughter and her husband, and then, of course, me, the 5th one. We think this is an excellent project. They've put a lot of time in on it. It's, I think, very impressive, and all the comments that are made tonight, we think this is our best option that we have on this property, and we're all in favor of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Leverett. Anybody else? Nobody? Okay, I'll close the public hearing. Mr. Murphy, do you have something you'd like to say? Go ahead.
I was just going to address a question.
Yes, sir, go right ahead.
Chairman Land. As to the use of the proposed facility, outlawing illicit activities, hazardous waste, that sort of thing, I think the applicant would be happy to put that in the pattern booklet.
Have you seen this?
That's well, I haven't seen that exact. I
think you need to read it before you commit to it.
I'll say from the city's standpoint, these things are not allowed in self-storage
Well, I
units,
was going to say,
period.
codes are going to take care of a lot of this, Mr. Johnson.
All of it.
But we would be happy to include, I mean, we don't want people working in cars there or cooking or having live animals. I mean, it's dangerous.
All of these things are not permitted.
Now, auctions, the only thing about that's an issue is it is typical, and there's a legal procedure for doing so, that people abandon these things. So what they do is they'll have a small auction on site. I don't know if you've seen these TV shows where they think that they're going to find a Mona Lisa in there, and it's usually moldy socks. But that's the procedure through which the facilities have to follow to be able to clean themselves out. And so if we're talking about a flea market or an auction for used cars, that's one thing, but an auction of the contents of the unit is something that they have to do in conjunction with the rules that apply. They have to give proper notice, all those good things. It's kind of similar to a foreclosure almost. But they don't really have a lot of leeway there. They can't just take the stuff out and sell it or keep it for themselves. And so with that exception, I think most of these things are by code fine, and we probably would add some things to this list anyway, and we can include it in the pattern booklet if you'd like.
What about the comment regarding the landscaping on the front end?
That's no problem. I think we committed to doing that in the beginning. And I had a call earlier today where someone mentioned that the grass was getting a little high, and we'll address that.
Mr. Lamb, I'm going to ask my third question, even though I'm not allowed to. Mr. Johnson, Ms. Ely tells me that everything on this list is already prohibited in our code today
Okay.
for multi-storage, so that's going to give you a whole lot of relief.
Okay, I was not aware that that was in the codes anymore.
Yes, sir. And Mr. Whitaker will make sure that they're enforced if needed.
Okay.
But good points, Mr. Johnson, good points.
I think we'd be happy to supplement some of these things.
Okay.
No garage bands.
Do you have a
Mr.
copy
Young.
of this?
I do now.
All right. Anybody, any other questions from the Planning Commission?
And Brick, you mentioned that you were going to landscape and maintain the area that's for future development. There will not be any permitted parking on that property as it's currently used today for dump trucks and that type of equipment. Is that correct?
My understanding is it's for being zoned for commercial use, not industrial use.
Okay.
And a staging yard for dump trucks is not something that's in the package.
Well, it's something that's currently being used as, and certainly as an amenity to the neighborhood. I think the warehouse storage is going to be a fantastic facility. It's the perfect use for that piece of property, I think. And if there's no other comments, I'll move for approval as presented.
Mr. Smotherman, does that include the additional comments?
With the additional comments.
Somebody second it.
Motion is made. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you, Mr. Murphy. Mr. Taylor. Okay, the third public hearing today is an annexation plan of services and an annexation petition for approximately 76 acres located along New Salem Highway. William and Caroline Waite are the applicants. Ms. Green.
Thank you, sir. The third public hearing this evening is for you to consider the adoption of a plan of services and also of an annexation petition which has been submitted by the William and Carolyn Waite for property they own along Highway 99. This property is approximately 76 acres in total, and they are the owners of the property and have provided us an annexation petition which you have available in your packet. The annexation study does include approximately 870 linear feet of New Salem Highway right-of-way, and which is approximately 2 acres, and that's shown on the map before you. The map we have available shows the property in the purple color. The property shaded yellow with the green outline are current city limits. So you can see that this parcel is contiguous with current city limits along both its western and southern property lines. There is a very small gap left along the Highway 99 right-of-way so that the city will not technically encompass North Saddlebrook or Stonebrook, Brook Hill, and Campbell Brown subdivisions, which are located to the north and are currently in the unincorporated area of Rutherford County. So this property will be contiguous and will leave a small gap so that those properties won't be completely encircled. This public hearing that you will hold in just a moment will be to consider the adoption of the plan of services and also the annexation petition. Our fourth and final item on the public hearing portion of our agenda this evening is for you to consider a zoning change request, which is a separate matter. This public hearing is strictly for the annexation. The next public hearing, I'll give another presentation regarding the zoning change, and then there'll be a public hearing regarding the zoning change. The applicants' representatives are here. They did hold a neighborhood meeting, and I think most of the comments generated from the neighborhood meeting were regarding the proposed zoning, which we'll discuss next. I have provided to you a plan of services that outlines the city services and when we can provide them, and we can provide all city services in a reasonable time. I will point out that the Murfreesboro Fire and Rescue Department did have some concern with the width of the existing driveway. And so the plan of services has a condition that because the existing house is served by a narrow driveway with a grate crossing, the Murfreesboro Fire and Rescue Department vehicles may have difficulty accessing the site from New Salem Highway. And additionally, there are no fire hydrants within 500 feet of the existing house. The Murfreesboro Fire and Rescue Department is recommending that the property be annexed only if a new fire hydrant is installed and driveway improvements are constructed along the western side of the subject property, connecting the subject property to Asher's Fork Road, which currently dead ends to the property. And then this is something that prior to the annexation of the subject property, the applicants could execute a legal agreement with the city ensuring that these improvements will be completed within 3 months of the effective date of annexation. Of course, if there was no house there, they wouldn't have concern, but they want to be able to provide our services to that home, and I believe that that's a reasonable condition that we have looked at on similar projects in the past. Other than that, there is sewer on the water now, or sewer on the property now, and there's also water available. And of course, we're aware of the existing conditions of Highway 99 and the proposed improvements by the Tennessee Department of Transportation to increase and improve the transportation network of Highway 99. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them either before or after the public hearing, but you should conduct a public hearing regarding the annexation and the plaintiff services and petition.
Okay. Any questions of the staff before we go any further? Does the applicant have anything they'd like to say for the annexation request? Okay. In that case, I'll open the public hearing for the annexation request portion of this property only. So anybody would like to speak either for or against annexation of this property, please come forward. Nobody? Okay. I'll close the public hearing. If there's questions by members of the Planning Commission, if not, we're ready for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion we approve the annexation and plaintiff services for this piece of property.
Second.
Motion is made and seconded. All in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. All opposed. Motion carries. Final public hearing tonight is a zoning application for approximately 74 acres located along New Salem Highway to be zoned commercial fringe, approximately 26.1 acres, and residential multifamily 12, approximately 23.1 acres, and RZ, approximately 25 acres, simultaneous with annexation. William and Caroline Waite are the applicants. Ms. Green.
Thank you, sir. As I mentioned before, this next presentation is regarding the zoning request simultaneous with the annexation for property located along Highway 99. It's located along the south side of Highway 99, and the subject property is shaded in 3 colors. It's blue, purple, and orange, and that corresponds with zoning change requests that are being made. The existing city limits is in the yellow, and the white area is the unincorporated area of Rutherford County. The subject property is located along the south side of New Salem Highway, just east of Cason Lane, and it consists of approximately 74 acres. It's currently undeveloped with the exception of one single-family house. Spence Creek, its floodway and floodplain are also located along the property, along the north end of the property, and you can see a blue squiggly line going across the blue color, and that would be the Spence Creek. The annexation and plaintiff services was the previous item on the agenda, and the applicants are requesting that the area shaded blue be zoned CF, that's Commercial Fringe District, and that's approximately 26 acres. The area shaded orange, which is the middle portion, be zoned RM12, and that's Multifamily Residential District, with a density of 12 dwelling units per acre, and that totals approximately 23 acres. And in the southern area, the orange shaded portion of the property, they're requesting to be zoned RZ, which is Zero Lot Line Residential District, and that is approximately 25 acres. And so they've put the proposed commercial fringe zoning adjacent to the state highway and a major arterial. The actual developable area of the CF, proposed CF area, is less than the 26 acres that I quoted because the floodway of Spence Creek will consume a portion of that property. At 12 units per acre for the middle portion, the RM12 district, they could yield approximately 276 multifamily dwelling units with the potential of additional density bonuses that we've talked about in the past. And the RZ zoning would permit zero lot line homes, both single family, attached and detached, which are both part of zero lot line. To the west of the property, along the same highway, are property zone CH, which is Highway Commercial District, which is a more intense commercial zoning than the CF district, which is adjacent to the CF property. The Planning Commission will be considering a master plan for the future development considered a master plan for future development of this property. And then also to the west is property zoned OGR, and that's General District Office. So it allows both office uses and residential uses. The Three Rivers development is also located to the west, and that a part of that development was the construction of Cason Lane, or the portion of Cason Lane south of Highway 99. There was a neighborhood meeting for the zoning change request, and I think that it was well attended. You should consider this zoning change request and have a public hearing, and then formulate a recommendation to City Council. If you have questions, staff will be glad to answer those questions either before or after the public hearing.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Green. Any questions of staff? Okay. Does the applicant have anything they'd like to say? Mr. Murphy.
Mr. Murphy represent the world.
Chairman Lamb, once again, pleasure to be here tonight. I'm hitting 3 for 3 tonight on zoning, so that's good. A good thing for me. So I'm glad to be very busy. It's a nice day for me. So I represent another group of lovely people, William and Caroline Waite. I've been members of the community for much longer than I've been on the planet, and are upstanding members, as everybody knows. They own 74.14 acres on Highway 99 Salem Road, which has been their home for at least 30 years. And they moved there before Three Rivers was there, before the neighboring kind of estate-style lots, I would say, moved in. And it was their little slice of paradise. But now that they're getting a little older, they want to downsize. They're tired of bush hogging 70-plus acres. And would like to, at this point, get it rezoned, seeing the desire for growth in that area. Just want to hold this up for a minute because it's kind of illustrated. It's a bit helpful. Let's see if I can get this in the camera shot there. All right. So this is kind of reverse. Here's Highway 99 right here. Here's the proposed commercial fringe, the 26.07 acres. And the reason that they requested commercial fringe off the bat, that is Mr. Wade, was to try to be sensitive to these large homes down through here. There are 7 different adjoining properties here. All of the adjoining properties are 5 acres or larger, and he just felt like, to be a good neighbor, he wanted to go ahead and take out some of the more objectionable uses that are permissible under commercial highway, and we wouldn't be that concerned for the neighbors to be gone. So no kennels or auto lots or drive-in burger joints, that sort of thing. But with the idea of keeping the commercial corridor that's now past Cason Lane and keeping that going. Because obviously 99 is driving commercial, and as it widens, it'll only be that much more desirable for commercial. Then a section, which is about where their house is, of 23.05 acres of RM12, which would allow for apartment complexes and various other fairly dense uses. And then proposed RZ, which is a classification that I hadn't seen a whole lot of till recently. That's your zero lot line product, townhomes, attached or detached, condos, that sort of thing, which is more desirable for people who don't, like the Waits, don't no longer want to care for a large yard and tend to pool and that sort of thing. Initially, one of the things that I was charged with was the Waits wanted to be very forthcoming and very engaging with the neighbors, and so we identified each of the property owners who would be most effective, which are these property owners down through here. And I called every single one of them and talked to them just to kind of introduce myself and talk a little bit about the proposal and kind of how things would go. And you've got Mr. Holcomb, Kelly Holcomb, who's a local celebrity that lives right here. You've got Bob McCormick, then the Stenekers, the Rollins, the Prices, the Walkers, and then Miss Erickson. I was able to, we had a small meeting at my office with most of these property owners before we had a formal neighborhood meeting. It was just, let's sit down, have some cookies, and let's talk, because we wanted their input and wanted to talk to them before we got too far down the pike. Because if they had strong feelings one way or the other, we needed to incorporate that into our process. The couple members that were not able, or neighbors that were not able to meet that night, we met with one-on-one, and then Mrs. Erickson, who we'd set a meeting and we weren't able to meet face-to-face. I talked to several times on the phone, and their concerns were your typical concerns, drainage, which is kind of a site plan issue, but certainly can be addressed. I think Bill Huddleston may be Mr. Drainage when it comes to Murfreesboro. But that was something that we could allay their fears on. And then they wanted to discuss general things about buffering, setbacks, those sorts of things, common questions that come up and that the city ordinances are designed to address. One of the good things is these lots are large. And as Joseph used to say, our former planning director, distance is the best buffer. And so these homes have large lots. They're not like my house on a smaller lot like this. They're backing up. This is backing up to estate-style lots. I mean, they really are quite large. You've got several ponds. For example, Mr. Holcomb has a pond. And there is a significant tree line here as well. We talked to them about buffering and screening and when and how it would be developed, and the answer is Mr. Wade is just getting it rezoned. There are no current plans for the property. We then had a neighborhood meeting, which was fairly well attended as well. There were about 10 people that came, and we had lots of questions, a lot of similar things that you hear. How would you access the property? Those sorts of things. But we didn't get a lot, particularly from these neighbors, the most effective, of we just don't want this. We got a lot of, well, how is this going to affect me, and are there checks in place that the city has to address these things? And I think, by and large, we were able just to say, city ordinance provides for this. Oh, well, we didn't know that. And that was helpful to be able to do. And it was the sort of questions that I have answers to. Not big philosophical questions, but how is this going to affect my property lines? And so I think it was very productive. Just in closing, I've had lots of communications with Mr. Allen and various other members of this area here, most affected. They are concerned. I don't think any of them said, we don't want anything here. At least these property owners didn't. They understood that growth was coming and felt like Mr. Waite was a good neighbor and that he would do a good project, which he intends to do. And that is pretty much, I'm going to hand things over to Clyde, who can talk a little bit more about the design and how you would access it and those sorts of things. And we'll be here to answer any questions you may have. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. Mr. Roundtree, once again.
Thank you, Brick. Chairman Lamb, Commissioners, City staff, my name is Clyde Roundtree, Huddleston Steel Engineering. And as Brick mentioned, the only thing I really want to add is just kind of the logic. We felt like the CF zoning would be a good transition from the CH and adjacent to the Spence Creek neighborhood. As far as the RM and then the RZ, somewhat comparable products is adjacent to the adjacent property. We think the primary access for the rear portion of the development will be Cason Lane, and then for the commercial portion will obviously be Salem Highway. As Margaret Ann mentioned, there's a waterway that's going to traverse the property as well as a TVA line, so not all the 26 acres is developable for commercial fringe. We do think there's a parcel towards the front portion of the property that can be developed, and then everything else be developed behind the TVA line. I spent some time driving the property, and I have some pictures of the buffer line. That's going to be a major concern for the neighbors. So if I could hand this out real quick.
You gave the wrong person the one first.
If you're unsure, we can share.
I don't know if I want to get too close.
No,
to
these
Mr.
things are
Clark. I might get-
expensive,
He
so
might get cooties
let's
from
make
me.
it
Hadn't heard that in a long time. What? Catching cooties from me.
We've got one.
Carrie, you need one? If I could just walk through these images real quick. Image number 1 is a view looking into the buffer along the Spence Creek property line on the front portion of the Waite property. Hold it up.
Yeah, we got.
And then, so you can see the tree line's rather dense, and that's fairly consistent throughout the whole property line. I did want to document in image 2 that where the TVA line comes through, that's probably the clearest portion of the property. That's obvious because TVA is going to keep that clear. You can see an adjacent home in the Spence Creek neighborhood through this gap, but that's really the only gap along the property line. And then the portion in image 3 is really the rear portion of the property. So both the front and the rear, really outside of the TVA line, are highly vegetated tree lines. And then what I wanted to show on image 4 is I actually drove in the neighborhood on Spence Creek Lane and took a picture back of the buffer. So that's from inside the neighborhood looking back towards the Waite's property. So you can see that it's a fairly substantial line on both sides. It's not just a true fence row, it's actually a pretty dense tree line. And then I included the image 5 because that's Stone Creek at Three Rivers there, and Creekside at Three Rivers. And that to the right is the buffer that they installed for Three Rivers. And that's the Waite's property right there. So there's literally no connection from the Waite property to Three Rivers. It's very dense, and that was taken just recently. So it can kind of show you there can be a 3-story structure potentially somewhat relevant, related to that property line and still have a very dense cover. So I just wanted to say the Waites have every desire to keep the tree line intact as much as possible. I'm sure the neighbors will have some suggestions about that. And so with that in mind, just want to make sure you had a working knowledge of what that property line looks like. We're excited about the possibility of this project. The Waites have been very patient in this process. The neighbors have been very communicative with us, and it's been a working relationship that we've enjoyed. And with that in mind, I'm open for any questions you may have, and I know we'll open for public hearing.
Any question from the Planning Commission for Mr. Roundtree? Thank you, sir. We may call you back up later. Okay, I'll open the public hearing for this proposal right now. Anybody that'd like to speak, please come to the microphone.
Good evening, Chairman Lamb, Commissioners. My name is Wayne Overman, 133 Spence Creek Lane. Live in the estates that the gentlemen were talking about, and I think they covered it fairly well. Mr. Waite and his wife have been very good neighbors in the area, and we're really appreciative of the way they've approached this particular project. I think the neighbors in the area have been somewhat concerned about higher density in the area, and not only the buffer, but making sure that there's some security of people getting into the backyards of the area. We have ponds and whatnot back there, which can be a attractive nuisance to younger children. And so there has been discussion about making sure that there's a security fence or some type of way of making sure that people aren't able to roam into the backyards and get into particular areas. We've also had concern, about there has been a master plan for this area. And we'd like to make sure that you consider the plan that you put in place, that there is a proper transition between the node there at Cason Lane and 99, where it is commercial highway, going to commercial fringe as Mr. Waite has proposed, but really try to keep the pastoral setting that was initially planned in the overall master plan for that area. We liked that plan. We like to keep it in that way as possible, and we'd like you to consider following the plan that was put in place originally as best you can. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Overman. Anybody else? Last chance. Seeing no one come forward, I'll close the public hearing.
Wait a second, wait a
Excuse
second. Here we go.
me. You barely beat the gavel.
This is my first time, so.
That's okay.
Sorry, I apologize. Chairman, everyone here,
Please give us your name and address, please.
Martha Price, 154 Spence Creek Lane. We are currently building a new home, and our concern is with the commercial fringe. We have a list here that it states that there isn't a liquor store that could possibly go in there, and we just feel that that wouldn't be the best for that area. Also with the, I don't know all these terms, I apologize, but with the, next to our lot would be an RM12, I guess, and an RZ, but on the RM12, I'm not sure what the parameters that they've set up for in there as far as where the lights need to shine away from our homes, if there's any swimming pools that they're going to put in with those apartment complexes, that there would be away from our property, not next to our property lines. And no more than, 2 stories high. With pools come a lot of noise, and so we just would request that. And again, that's it. That's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Price. Anybody else? Okay, seeing nobody come forward, I'll close the public hearing. Mr. Roundtree, you want to address, I know a lot of these issues will be handled at a site plan type situation, but if you'd address the uses, lighting, number of stories and this kind of thing.
I think we'll probably tag team that, if that's all right. One of the things that we wanted to emphasize was that buffer. The reason that Mr. Roundtree showed you the interface with Three Rivers at Creekside, the assisted living facility, is it's a big building. And you can't see it from the Waits house. And the reason for that is you've got very tall, very mature trees. And the good thing about this property is, and addressing the RM12, you've got that tree line that the Waits intend to keep intact. It's a better buffer than a fence is going to be. It's a better buffer than anything besides distance, and we've got both those things here. We've got distance and that tree line, and I don't think you're going to have the kind of problems you would normally have when you've got small lots up next to a crammed-in apartment complex sort of situation. They've got plenty of space to work with. Whoever develops the multifamily, they've got no incentive to push things right up against the line because it hurts view sheds and those sorts of things. The limit on 3-story buildings can really be a deal killer, these sorts of things. But we've got a very mature, very tall existing buffer there. The houses are set pretty far away from the property lines as well. So it's not like we've got an interface where we've got practically 0 lot line houses with apartments right next to them. I mean, we've got a lot of space to work with. I'm happy to talk to Mr. Wade about the liquor store request. This is the first time we've heard about that. We did hand out the commercial fringe versus commercial highway, and that was my highlighting. And I emailed that out as well to the neighbors to ask them, is there something in commercial fringe that is objectionable to you? But also to illustrate how much better a commercial fringe is than what could have been requested, which is commercial highway, which is consistent with the neighboring properties. but you wouldn't have car lots, things like that. But I'm happy to talk to Mr. Wade about the liquor store restriction. And Clyde may be able to speak more about the swimming pools, but once again, I think we've got, the best sort of buffer, which is one Mother Nature creates, and fences and walls and those sorts of things are not nearly as effective as a heavily overgrown tree line of 40-foot tall, 50-foot tall trees. We've got some land out in Rutherford, and I'm trying to clean it up, and it takes, it's almost impossible to walk through property that is grown up like that. It's a very thick buffer. And I think that's one of the big selling points, both from a neighbor standpoint, but also from a developer wanting to buy the property, because they're going to see a pretty tree line, and they don't have to be concerned about what may happen next door in either direction. And Mr. Waite says he can't see their houses, can't see Creekside. It's very densely wooded. The developers have an incentive to keep that because they get part of their density, part of their buffering requirements fulfilled, and we've got space here. We've got a lot of it. So Clyde may have some more stuff to add.
And Chairman Lane, all I'd add to what Rick said is that in the past, at least apartment projects I've been a part of, Margaret Ann and the planning staff has been very active in terms of helping shape the site plan, in terms of building orientation, in terms of the last project we worked on, the pool became internal to the site, so it wasn't a visual obstruction to people, it wasn't a noise generator. So we've learned a lot in terms of how best to design buildings of this nature in relationship to adjacent neighborhoods. And so I think a lot of the concerns, light, the photometric plan would guard us against any sort of light intrusion into the neighborhood. Again, building orientations, how they, the length of the buildings, the size of the buildings, all those kind of things have been something that staff has had input on in the site plan process. So we feel confident that if this were to be eventually apartment buildings, that those sensitivity issues to the property line, to the adjacent neighborhood would be addressed. That's been my traction with Margaret Ann and the planning staff. It seems like they're as concerned as the neighbors are to make sure that's a good relationship adjacent to the property.
That's my experience, too.
Okay. Any questions from members of the Planning Commission? Apparently not. Thank you, gentlemen.
May I ask a question?
No. Yes, of course.
Mr. Murphy, you mentioned buffers. Are there any additional restrictions that you're writing on the property to require the existing buffers to be maintained, or are you referring to city standards? I wasn't quite sure what you're talking about with buffers.
Sure. We're just talking about maintaining that property line. I think the intent of the Waits is to maintain the existing property line and keep those trees there. And so if you want us to put some sort of restriction down that has some reasonable constraints, I'm sure that they'd be.
I think that you may need it to be a little bit wider than our minimum standards to keep some of that old trees in there.
Yeah,
and also
absolutely.
a buffer is not required between RZ zone and adjacent single-family zones because they're both single-family uses. So if the intention is to provide a buffer, I just want to be clear. And if not, then I just want you to know that as well.
Yeah.
So that was my question, just about the buffer.
I'm not trying to play lawyer at all.
No, I wasn't sure.
My goal always is to be as clear and forthcoming with you all as possible, or I don't get to be up here again. So I think the intent is to keep the tree line there, and
Okay.
In addition to a buffer as well, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
that
And
you will add.
I would imagine that we could probably do something in excess of what would be required. Now, the exact footage we probably need to get with Clyde and figure out how wide the tree line is.
Well, I think what
don't
we're
know
asking, Mr. Murphy, is you're going to leave the existing tree line buffering there, but
Yes, sir.
along the entire property line, are you going to have a restriction in there requiring the future developer to install buffering?
That's our intent, yes, sir.
That was my understanding.
And to maintain the existing, because you don't want them to come in and knock that out during construction and put in a 10 or 15 or whatever the required. That's part of what we want to try to do is make sure that they maintain that, and that's the part that would not necessarily be required.
Right.
just with a straight zoning without the restriction to keep the existing buffer there, plus any required buffer by
And in the
standard city zoning.
I'm sorry, Mrs. Jones, I didn't mean to. In the past, we've been able to craft language to preserve existing tree lines like that. That's always our goal. I think it's foolish when developers tear them out. Clyde and I had a conversation earlier today about a project that somebody had done that on, and we said, now they're going to have to replant all of it, and it's not going to look nearly as nice as it did before or be as effective. So it's not a hard sell to my clients and to developers to not disturb a tree line. It's one of those things that you shouldn't have to be told to do, like wear your seatbelt. So I think that probably before council we can come up with some specific requirements and say, the tree line, to the extent that the trees are healthy. One thing that I always try to include is if a tree is not healthy, we're allowed to cut it down for safety purposes, but not for aesthetic purposes or because somebody got a new chainsaw. We want to maintain the health of the tree line, but I think that's something we can come back with some specifics on. Mr. Roundtree was out there today, but I doubt he was out there surveying, and we kind of need to know how large, how thick that tree line is. If it's 30 feet, it's 30 feet, and that's probably something that would be fine. If it's 80 feet, then we need to probably find somewhere in between. But the intent was to keep it and to buffer the perimeter of the property, even when we're not required to.
The illustration says proposed 30-foot buffer, and I think 30-foot would easily take care of the existing trees. And the way our ordinance is written, if they have healthy trees on their property, they can count those for tree credits and don't have to tear them down to put a buffer in, so that can count toward their buffer requirement.
Okay, and that would be along the entire eastern property line?
The illustration shows it along the entire eastern property line. Or it shows it along the eastern property line, the southern property line. It takes it up on the western side to just where the pink and blue meet. And I don't know if that was your intent or if that's just. And we can have the cable department pull the illustration that I'm referring to on the TV. So there's a heavy line, heavier black line that goes around like this, and it stops here. Is that the proposed 30-foot buffer? It looks like. And then here it's a thinner line, which I just suppose means property line.
Well, there's a TVA easement that runs through there. That's one of the challenges.
And TVA would restrict what could go in a buffer. I mean, they trump any of our regulations.
I think you get the intention of the Planning Commission, and by the time you come back to council, I would think you'd refine this a little better, okay?
And I frankly had not studied actually what Clyde had put together as closely as I should have, but the 30 feet is in excess of what would be required anyway. And so, off the bat, we're already proposing more than would be the bulk requirements. And when there are gaps and things like that, we'd have additional plantings, obviously, would be required. And I think we can do some, now we've gotten through, hopefully if we get through Planning Commission night, we can do a little bit of surveying work and kind of figure out, maybe 40 feet, 30 feet, whatever it might be, and the places where there may be some opportunity or some challenges, particularly Bob McCormick, who he's probably got the view shed that's worse because of the TVA easement, and they just cut everything down to the ground. But I mentioned to him that we could try to get with TVA and see what they would let us plant. They are fickle about these things, but it's one of those things that we're sensitive to. And having clients on both sides of the fence, so to speak, I've got an incentive to try to strike compromise there. But that's where you're seeing, particularly where the creek and the TVA lines run through, is where you don't have that big buffer. But we're committed to doing that, and probably need to get you something in writing that's specific about that can be recorded as a restriction.
That'd be good. Any other questions or comments? Yes, Mr. Smotherman.
Brick, I think it's always helpful when the client that you represent is at the meeting. And
I'm sorry. I should have introduced Mr. and Mrs. Wake. They're right here.
Okay.
And their esteemed consultant, Mr. Larry Sims, is here as well. He's been part of our team and very helpful. Yep, I sometimes get a little ahead of myself, and I normally, in my notes, I had to introduce them was part of the deal, but sometimes I feel like I get up here and talk, and y'all want me to shut up and sit down sometimes, so I'm very pleased to be representing the Waits. Let's be honest, I'm a Murphy and a lawyer, I never shut up, so.
Okay, Brick, I'll go along with everything except this steam part. The reason I point that out is I think with the nod of a head that we can clear up at least one of the issues of concern as to whether or not we can remove the liquor store requirement. And the reason I say that is my vote will probably be determined on whether or not we can do that, because I think that's very, with all of the options that are available, and I know in the meeting or the hearing that we just had, that request was met. And I don't think that that is asking too much. I know that the City Council is currently working on an ordinance that will restrict the number of liquor stores, and so there may not even be permits available by the time this project is developed, which may eliminate it altogether. But just as a safeguard, would it be possible to go ahead and get that amendment in place?
Mr. Smotherman,
If you'll give me 2 seconds.
I have a bit of a concern with this in that this is straight zoning, and the prior was a planned commercial development where we have a full right to discuss uses and restrict uses and propose uses. But if liquor store is permitted as a use as of right in fringe zoning or commercial fringe zoning, it would not be appropriate for a planning commission to require them to remove it. Now, they certainly can voluntarily remove it. There have been times when people have proposed limitations of a variety, but it's not appropriate for us, for the Planning Commission, to require that a use be added or deleted as for a bulk zoning approval.
And I appreciate your legal opinion on that, but I also feel that it's not uncommon for restrictive covenants to be put on property when it's presented to us.
That has happened. You're correct.
What I'm asking is, would they consider that restrictive covenant?
I think he can consider that and maybe work on that and come back for the council, Eddie, because you're going to get to see it again.
Right.
Yeah, my understanding of the law is Mr. Ives is correct, that if we voluntarily restrict, we can voluntarily restrict anything that doesn't discriminate or discriminate against handicapped people or things like that. So, and liquor stores are not considered a special class of people. So the Waits are happy to do that. It wasn't really their intention to have that sort of use there anyway. They went to the commercial fringe to try to get rid of some uses that are more questionable. So they're happy to do that, as well as we can voluntarily increase the buffering requirements, and they're happy to do that. I mean, the goal here is to be good neighbors, and we've got some VIP neighbors, and we want to make them happy as well. So
Thank you, Brick.
They're very happy. So now I'll sit down and shut up.
Thank you, Brick. Any other questions? Now we're ready for a motion.
Do everything? Come on, boys.
Did this work? We're ready for a motion if anybody'd like to make it. I don't know if this is working or not.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the zoning application presented for us as stated.
Staff comments?
And to include all staff comments.
Second.
Motion is made and seconded. All in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. That concludes the public hearing portion of our agenda tonight. Staff reports and other business. Mr. Whitaker?
I have none, sir.
Bless you. In that case, we stand adjourned.